Her career is ruined, her family threatened, when Eleanor uncovers a brutal art forgery. The city's most dangerous collector has captured her, but instead of exposing her, he has branded her with a possessive mark. He's not just a billionaire, he's Enzo Moretti, a mafia boss, and now her desperate act has trapped her in his gilded cage. What began as a secret soon becomes his obsession. The chill of early morning permeated the grand echoing halls of the Obsidian Gallery, a coldness that seeped into Eleanor Vance's bones despite the plush cashmere coat she'd salvaged from a thrift store. It wasn't the kind of chill that promised crisp, invigorating air. It was the damp, ancient cold of marble and unspoken secrets. The scent of aged canvas, delicate solvents, and expensive floor polish hung heavy, a bittersweet perfume that once represented her deepest passion, now a constant reminder of her suffocating reality. Eleanor, a woman in her late 20s, moved with the quiet grace of someone perpetually trying not to be noticed. Her dark hair, usually a disciplined coil at the nape of her neck, had a few rebellious tendrils escaping, framing a face that was more earnest than beautiful, marked by an inherent intelligence in her tea-colored eyes. They were eyes that saw the world in shades of integrity and nuance, a dangerous trait in a place like the Obsidian. She was an archivist and junior restorer here, a title that barely acknowledged the depth of her expertise or the meticulous care she poured into every stroke of her brush, every delicate notation in her logs. Her workspace, a small, unassuming cubicle tucked away behind towering, climate-controlled display cases, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a carefully constructed prison. The hum of the humidifiers was a constant, low thrum, a white noise that did little to drown out the gnawing anxiety in her chest. Each morning, she would brew a weak tea at her desk, the lukewarm liquid doing little to thaw the internal frost. Today, the familiar ache in her shoulders felt heavier, the tremor in her hands more pronounced as she carefully, almost reverently, removed a dust cover from a Renaissance miniature. The vibrant hues, centuries old, seemed to mock the muted colors of her own life. Eleanor. My office. Now. Julian Thorne's voice, sharp and laced with an infuriating cheerfulness, sliced through the quiet. It was a voice designed to command, to project an image of effortless authority that was, in Eleanor's bitter experience, entirely undeserved. Julian, the gallery's charismatic and perpetually smiling director, was a predator in bespoke suits. He wore his ambition like a perfectly knotted silk tie, polished and impeccable, leaving a trail of discarded careers and bruised egos in his wake. Eleanor felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. It was never good when Julian summoned her. She rose, her movements precise, a practiced ballet of invisibility. The polished marble floor felt icy even through her sensible, worn heels. As she walked, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the vast plate glass of a display case, a slender figure, almost ephemeral against the opulent backdrop of priceless art. She felt like a phantom, her contributions invisible, her presence barely acknowledged. Julian's office, however, was a stark contrast to her humble nook. It was a testament to modern power, all sleek chrome, dark wood, and panoramic city views. The air here was thicker, saturated with the expensive scent of his cologne, a cloying, suffocating aroma that made her subtly wrinkle her nose. Julian sat behind a massive glass desk, a tableau of perfectly arranged papers and a gleaming, untouched espresso cup. He gestured dismissively to the chair opposite him, not bothering to make eye contact as he tapped a manicured finger on a tablet. Eleanor, darling. Wonderful news. The Davies Collection project? Signed, sealed, delivered. He finally looked up, his smile wide and utterly disingenuous. And, of course, a huge success for the gallery. My vision, my execution, all coming to fruition. Eleanor's breath hitched. The Davies Collection. She had spent 6 months meticulously researching, restoring, and cataloging every single piece, often working late into the night. Her detailed proposals, her intricate condition reports, her hours of agonizing over the correct chemical compounds for each delicate pigment, all of it had been presented to him, then magically repackaged as his vision. She felt the familiar sting of injustice, a hot, bitter wave that threatened to overwhelm her carefully constructed composure. Yes, Julian. A monumental achievement, she managed, her voice flat, devoid of the enthusiasm he clearly expected. Inside, a storm raged. My monumental achievement. He chuckled, a sound that grated on her nerves like fingernails on a chalkboard. Indeed. Though I must admit your little contribution was adequate. You understand, of course, that these high-profile projects require a certain flair. Presence. Something you, with all due respect, tend to lack. He leaned back, the leather of his chair groaning softly in protest. Now to business. The next quarterly reports are due. I'll need you to pull together all the financials for your department. And be thorough, Eleanor. We can't afford any discrepancies, especially with a new audit looming. The mention of discrepancies was a veiled threat, a reminder of her precarious position. Julian had a knack for creating paper trails that implicated others while keeping his own hands pristine. Eleanor knew he skimmed funds from various departments, disguised as operational costs. If an audit truly came, she, the quiet archivist, would be the most vulnerable target. Her mother's medical bills flashed before her eyes, an ever-present specter of doom. The intensive care unit stay from last month had devoured her meager savings, leaving her dangerously close to defaulting on the loans from her father's failed business. Each receipt, each payment, was a weight on her soul. Her mother, fragile and perpetually optimistic, called daily, her voice weak but steady. "How are things, my orchid?" she would ask, using her childhood nickname. "Are you happy, darling? Is the gallery treating you well?" Eleanor always lied, painting a picture of a thriving career, of appreciative colleagues. The truth, of being ground down, invisible, slowly suffocated by a gilded cage, was too painful to share. She was her mother's only hope, her only support. Failure was not an option. It was a devastating, crippling fear that drove her every waking hour. Back in her cubicle, the luminescence of the miniature painting blurred. The delicate brushstrokes, the intricate details she adored, now seemed dull, lifeless. She felt the heavy weight of the world pressing down on her slender shoulders, a silent scream building in her chest. She was trapped, utterly and irrevocably. Every escape route seemed blocked, every door sealed shut by Julian's machinations and her own crushing responsibilities. Later that afternoon, a hushed buzz spread through the gallery. A new acquisition was arriving, a masterpiece shrouded in secrecy, reportedly purchased by an anonymous, notoriously private collector. Eleanor heard the whispers. Enzo Moretti, some dared to breathe, a name synonymous with ruthless power and unimaginable wealth. Julian, unusually agitated, had locked himself in his office, barking orders. Eleanor felt a prickle of unease. Such a grand secret acquisition meant a private viewing was imminent, an event usually handled by Julian himself. She was suddenly called to prepare the main viewing room. As she walked, her internal dread intensified. There was a dangerous shift in the air, a subtle tremor that hinted at something far more sinister than Julian's usual petty abuses. She was being pulled into something much larger, much darker, and she felt utterly, terrifyingly alone. The private viewing room for the supposed Ming Dynasty vase was a symphony of hushed opulence. Velvety ropes cordoned off the display, polished pedestals held smaller artifacts, and the air, scented with a faint, exotic blend of sandalwood and old paper, hummed with the low murmur of connoisseurs and collectors. Eleanor, dressed in her most presentable but still slightly worn charcoal suit, felt acutely out of place amidst the glittering jewels and knowing smiles. She was ostensibly there for a final condition check on the vase, a task Julian had assigned her with a sly smirk, knowing full well it was a trap. If anything went wrong, she'd be blamed. Her gloved hands, usually so steady, trembled almost imperceptibly as she approached the centerpiece. The Ming vase, a seemingly flawless example of cobalt blue and white porcelain, sat under a beam of focused light, casting a luminous glow that captivated onlookers. Julian and the elusive collector, whose name floated around in hushed tones, Mr. Thorne never uttered it himself, a sure sign of its weight, were due any minute for their exclusive pre-auction inspection. Eleanor's heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She had spent the last hour alone with the vase, her expert eyes meticulously scanning every curve, every brushstroke. The initial appraisal reports, signed by supposed luminaries in the field, had declared it authentic. But Eleanor's gut, honed by years of intimate work with genuine masterpieces, screamed a different truth. The glaze, though expertly applied, had a faint, almost imperceptible sheen that was too perfect, too uniform for something crafted centuries ago. The subtle variations in the cobalt blue, the minute imperfections that gave true antiques their soul, were conspicuously absent. It was exquisite, undeniably. But it was also undeniably wrong. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. This wasn't just an accidental oversight. This was a deliberate, high-stakes forgery, designed to fool even the most discerning eye. Julian's involvement was obvious. This was why he had pushed so hard for this specific acquisition, why he'd sidelined the senior authenticators. Eleanor, with her quiet meticulousness, was the perfect scapegoat. Her mind raced. If she exposed it now, Julian would destroy her. He would fabricate evidence, accuse her of sabotage, and with his connections, her career would be over, her mother's medical care jeopardized, her brother's fragile future shattered. But if she let it pass, she would be complicit in a colossal fraud, a betrayal of everything she held sacred about art. The thought was a sickening, suffocating weight. Then, a flicker of defiance sparked within her. She wouldn't be a pawn. She wouldn't be silent. Carefully, her movements almost imperceptible, she reached into her inner coat pocket. Her fingers brushed against the cool, smooth metal of the tiny, high-resolution pin camera she kept for documenting delicate restorations. It was her secret weapon, usually used for capturing minute details. Today, it would capture a colossal lie. With practiced stealth, she leaned in closer to the vase, feigning intense scrutiny. Her heart hammered so loudly she feared it might betray her. Her eyes, however, were on the minuscule lens of the pen, expertly aimed. Click. The sound was almost inaudible, masked by the general ambient hum of the gallery's climate control and the distant murmur of early guests. She captured a close-up of the suspicious glaze, then a wider shot of the subtle color inconsistencies. One more. She shifted, her hand brushing against the pedestal. Click. A shadow fell over her, sudden and absolute. It wasn't the fleeting shadow of a passing guest, but the deliberate, encompassing darkness of a dominant presence. Eleanor froze, her breath catching in her throat, the small pen camera still clutched in her hand. A wave of raw, primal fear washed over her, chilling her to the bone. Slowly, she turned. He stood barely a foot behind her, his presence an almost physical force. Enzo Moretti, the collector. The name, whispered in awe and trepidation in circles of wealth and power, now solidified before her. He was taller than she'd imagined, his frame lean but undeniably powerful beneath the perfectly tailored dark suit. His hair, raven black, was swept back, revealing sharp, almost chiseled features. But it was his eyes that truly captivated and terrified her. They were the color of polished obsidian, dark, fathomless, utterly unblinking, and alarmingly intelligent. They didn't merely look at her. They saw her, piercing through her carefully constructed facade, straight to the raw nerve of her fear and her secret. He didn't need to speak. His silence was a command, his gaze an interrogation. Eleanor felt her blood run cold, every muscle in her body tensing, poised for flight or defense, though she knew neither would be effective against a man like him. The small camera felt like a lead weight in her hand, suddenly heavy, suddenly incriminating. His lips, thin and precise, curved into a slow, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't a smile of warmth or amusement, but one of dangerous knowing. What an interesting piece of deception, Miss Vance. His voice was a low, resonant rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very air, stealing her breath. It was smooth, devoid of any discernible accent, and carried the weight of unquestionable authority. Are you admiring the craft or documenting its demise? Eleanor couldn't speak. Her tongue felt thick and useless in her mouth. He knows. The thought screamed through her mind with devastating certainty. He had seen everything. The subtle flick of her wrist, the precise angle of the pen. He took a single, deliberate step closer, invading her personal space with an unspoken claim. The subtle scent of expensive cologne, clean and sharp, mingled with something else, a faint metallic tang, like old money and quiet violence. It was intoxicating and terrifying. His dark eyes remained locked on hers, unwavering, almost possessive. Then, slowly, deliberately, his gloved hand reached out. Eleanor flinched, a tiny, involuntary movement, expecting him to seize the camera, to expose her. Instead, his fingers, strong and calloused, brushed gently, almost tenderly, against a straight tendril of dark hair near her cheekbone, tucking it behind her ear. The touch was feather-light, yet it sent a jolt, a searing current of shock and something disturbingly akin to awareness through her entire body. It was a gesture of intimate possessiveness, an unspoken declaration that branded her in that instant. His thumb lingered for a fraction of a second against her skin, a soft, warm pressure that left a burning trail. He wasn't aggressive, not overtly. His control was absolute, his power undeniable. The action was so unexpected, so intimate, it robbed her of breath. It was a clear, unspoken message. I see you. I know your secret, and now you are mine to decide what happens to. Eleanor's heart hammered a desperate staccato, wild bird trapped in her chest. Fear warred with a strange, unwilling flicker of something else, a dangerous allure, a spark of morbid curiosity. In the heart of her terror, a tiny, defiant whisper surfaced. Is this what being truly seen feels like? Even by a monster? The air between them crackled with an undeniable, terrifying chemistry. She felt exposed, vulnerable, yet paradoxically, intensely alive. He finally dropped his hand, the brief contact leaving her skin tingling, scorched. His smile deepened a fraction of an inch, acknowledging the profound impact he had just made. I'll be seeing you around, Miss Vance. It wasn't a question. It was a pronouncement. Then, with the same unsettling stillness with which he had appeared, Enzo Moretti turned and walked away, melting back into the shadows of the opulent gallery. Eleanor watched him go, her body rigid, her mind reeling. The scent of sandalwood and danger lingered in his wake. Her hidden camera still clutched in her hand. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the gallery's marble, that her world had just irrevocably changed. She had stumbled into a dangerous game, and the collector had just placed his first possessive claim. The air in Julian Thorne's office, usually a bastion of polished calm, crackled with a brittle, dangerous tension. Eleanor stood before his massive glass desk, her hands clasped tightly behind her back, her posture rigid. Julian, his face devoid of its usual charming facade, was a mask of cold fury. He held a tablet, its screen glowing with magnified images, not of the Ming vase, but of her. Specifically, her hand, clutching the pen camera, poised to document the forgery. The images were grainy, clearly from a hidden security camera, a blind spot she hadn't known existed. So, Miss Vance, Julian's voice was a low, guttural growl, utterly unlike his public persona. It seems you have an unfortunate habit of disrupting gallery operations, interfering with a high-value acquisition, attempting to sabotage a crucial deal. His eyes, usually gleaming with false warmth, were now chips of glacial ice. Tell me, what exactly were you planning to do with these recordings? Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed her throat. She had known this was coming, yet the raw aggression in Julian's voice still shook her. I was merely documenting the discrepancies, she managed, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to keep it steady. The vase, it's a forgery. A very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. Julian laughed, harsh, dismissive sound that bounced off the sleek walls. A forgery? You, a junior restorer, dare to contradict the assessment of half a dozen world-renowned experts? My experts. He slammed the tablet onto the desk, the impact echoing ominously. No, Eleanor. What you were doing was attempting to discredit me, to undermine this gallery, perhaps even to steal the piece yourself or ransom your so-called proof to a rival. The accusations were monstrous, grotesque distortions of her intentions. A wave of profound injustice washed over her, sickening and nauseating. That's not true. I would never. Silence. Julian roared, rising from his chair, his tall frame looming over her. I have security footage. I have your own rather clumsy attempt at a cover-up. And I have connections, Eleanor. Connections that will ensure that not only will you never work in the city again, but that certain financial inconveniences might befall those you care about. Your mother, for instance. Or perhaps your brother's current predicament. He smiled then, a cruel, predatory baring of teeth. Think very carefully about your next words, darling. Your entire future, and theirs, depends on it. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. Her mother. Evan. He knew. He had researched her, found her vulnerabilities, and was now twisting the knife. The air in the opulent office seemed to thin, suffocating her. Desperation, raw and absolute, seized her. She was truly at the precipice, staring into the abyss. Just as Julian leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. Now sign this confession admitting your attempts to extort the gallery, and perhaps I'll be lenient. The door to his office swung open without a knock. Enzo Moretti stood in the doorway, a silent, imposing figure. He didn't stride in, he simply was there, his presence instantaneously altering the very atmosphere of the room. The oppressive tension Julian had created seemed to shatter and reform around Enzo, becoming colder, sharper, infinitely more dangerous. His obsidian eyes swept over Julian's contorted face, then settled on Eleanor, noting her pale complexion, the terrified tremor in her stance. He held a slim, unadorned black folder in his hand. Julian, startled, stammered, "Mr. Moretti, I didn't expect you. We were just—" Enzo cut him off with a mere flick of his wrist. His voice, when it came, was a low, silken threat that seemed to unspool slowly into the room. "I believe I heard you making rather a lot of noise, Julian." Disturbing my contemplation of this unique acquisition, his gaze shifted to the tablet on the desk, resting briefly on Eleanor's image, then to Julian. "And I believe I just heard you attempting to frame one of my employees for your own incompetence and dishonesty." Julian's face went chalk white. My incompetence? "Sir, this woman was attempting." Silence. The word was barely a whisper, yet it resonated with an absolute authority that silenced Julian more effectively than any shout. Enzo stepped fully into the room, moving with the fluid grace of a hunter. He didn't approach Eleanor directly. Instead, he stopped beside Julian's desk, placing his black folder down with a soft thud that seemed to shake the room. "The forgery, Julian," Enzo said, his eyes now fixed on Thorne, "is glaringly obvious to anyone with a discerning eye. Which, it appears, you lack. Your attempts to pass it off as genuine would have irrevocably damaged the Obsidian Gallery's reputation. And since I am now the primary investor with a controlling stake in said gallery, that damage directly impacts me." He paused, letting the full weight of his statement sink in. "And anyone who works for me. Or more accurately, anyone I choose to work for me." His gaze finally returned to Eleanor, cold but assessing. "Miss Vance," he said, and the way he spoke her name sent a shiver down her spine, a possessive claim in itself. "Your instincts were correct. Your loyalty to truth, admirable. Your methods, however, were unsophisticated." He then turned back to Julian, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "As for you, Julian, your employment here is terminated. Effective immediately. Clean out your desk. Security will escort you out." Julian sputtered, a grotesque parody of his former self. You can't. I have a contract. My connections." Enzo's smile was a chilling sight. "Your contract means nothing. Your connections will soon find you inconvenient. Leave? No. Before I decide to be less civil." The implicit threat was terrifyingly clear. As Julian stumbled out, a humiliated, broken man, Eleanor remained rooted to the spot, a maelstrom of emotion swirling within her. Relief, so potent it almost buckled her knees, was quickly followed by a profound apprehension. She was saved, yes, but Enzo Moretti had just pulled her from one trap only to place her, unmistakably, into his own. Enzo turned to her fully, his obsidian eyes locking with hers. The room, devoid of Julian's presence, now felt vast, charged solely with his formidable energy. "You are clearly intelligent, Miss Vance, and you possess a rare integrity. Qualities wasted on the petty machinations of men like Thorne." He walked slowly towards her, each step deliberate, unhurried, like a predator circling its prey. "However, your recklessness put you, and by extension, my newly acquired asset, the gallery, at risk. That cannot be tolerated." He stopped directly in front of her, his height towering over her, his presence utterly dominant. "Here is the deal, Miss Vance. You will no longer work as a junior restorer under Julian Thorne. You will work directly for me. You will be assigned to my private collection, overseeing all authentication, restoration, and archiving. You will have unprecedented access, unlimited resources, and the full protection of my organization." He paused, his gaze intense, piercing. "In return, your unwavering loyalty and absolute discretion. Your past debts will be taken care of. Your mother's medical expenses guaranteed. Your brother's situation alleviated. Your safety assured. Do you understand?" Eleanor swallowed, her throat dry. It wasn't a question. It was a demand. He wasn't offering help. He was offering a gilded cage, a golden leash. She would be safe, yes, but at what cost to her independence, her very self? The thought was terrifying. Yet, the image of her mother's pale face, Evan's troubled eyes, flashed in her mind. She had no choice. She was at the bottom of a well, and he was the only one offering a rope, even if that rope was a chain. "Ah, I understand," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth, a bitter surrender. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched Enzo's lips. Good. Then it is settled. You will move into the staff quarters at my private residence. Effective tomorrow. Consider it part of your new working arrangement. For your safety, of course. Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. His residence. This wasn't just a job. It was total absorption. A new kind of captivity, more luxurious, more absolute. Disorientation washed over her, a dizzying sense of having stepped through a looking glass into a world she couldn't comprehend. She was safe, yes, strangely, undeniably secure, but utterly and completely trapped within the dangerous orbit of Enzo Moretti. As he turned to leave, her gaze fell upon the black folder he had placed on Julian's desk. It was open just a crack. Inside, among neatly typed documents, she glimpsed a single photograph, a discreetly taken shot of her, standing by her mother's hospital bed, her face etched with exhaustion and worry. He hadn't just known her vulnerabilities, he had been watching her for a long, long time. The transition into Enzo Moretti's world wasn't a move. It was an absorption. Eleanor's small apartment, with its familiar scent of old books and brewing tea, was packed and emptied in a single afternoon by men as silent and efficient as shadows. She found herself in a sprawling private residence, a penthouse that seemed to float above the city, all glass walls, polished marble, and art so exquisite it took her breath away. The air here was always warm, subtly humidified, carrying the faint, clean scent of expensive lilies and the underlying, almost metallic tang of something powerful and controlled. Her new quarters were less a room and more a suite, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic vista of the city's glittering sprawl. Silk sheets, thicker than anything she'd ever owned, graced the bed. A private studio, stocked with every conceivable restoration tool and chemical, awaited her. It was a gilded cage, exquisitely crafted, yet a cage nonetheless. She was safe, certainly. Her mother's medical care had subtly upgraded. Her brother Evan had miraculously secured an apprenticeship that offered stability, far from the shadows of his past mistakes. Julian Thorne's name, once a persistent whisper of dread, had vanished entirely from her professional circle. His reputation in tatters, his career irrevocably ended by an unseen hand. These details, never explicitly discussed by Enzo, were merely facts that presented themselves, tangible evidence of his pervasive influence. Her work now revolved entirely around Enzo's private collection. He possessed an eclectic, breathtaking array of artifacts, from ancient Roman sculptures to vibrant contemporary pieces, each accompanied by flawless provenance. Eleanor lost herself in the painstaking process of analysis and preservation, the only time she felt truly free. Yet, even here, his presence was an undeniable force. Their interactions were frequent, often in the evenings, when the city lights twinkled below like scattered diamonds. Enzo would summon her to his expansive study, a cavernous room dominated by towering bookshelves and a massive ebony desk. The scent of aged leather and fine whiskey often hung in the air. He would sit, watching her as she examined a new acquisition, his obsidian eyes following every precise movement of her hands, every slight tilt of her head. The Caravaggio, he murmured one evening, his voice a low, gravelly counterpoint to the soft rustle of her protective gloves against the canvas. Its shadows, they speak of a violence, a profound darkness. Yet, within it, a delicate beauty. Eleanor paused, her breath catching. She looked up, finding his gaze unwavering. Indeed, she replied, her voice softer than she intended. The contrast is what makes it so powerful. The light would mean nothing without the abyss. She felt a strange, unsettling resonance in his words, a parallel to their own intertwined existence. He was the abyss undeniably, but there was a light, a fragile, persistent one within her that he seemed drawn to. He rose then, moving with that fluid, predatory grace, and walked towards her, stopping inches away. The sheer proximity of him was overwhelming. The subtle, clean scent of his cologne, sharp like pine and something indescribably masculine, enveloped her. "And you, Miss Vance," he said, his voice a low hum that vibrated through her. "You specialize in bringing light to the darkest corners, in restoring what others deem lost. A dangerous profession, wouldn't you say? To touch the broken, to find beauty in decay." Eleanor felt a tremor run through her. "It is my passion, Mr. Moretti," she managed, her gaze locked on his, a dangerous defiance flickering within her. "And sometimes the most broken things hold the most profound stories." His lips curved into that familiar, dangerous half-smile. Perhaps they are simply beyond repair, and touching them only stains you. His eyes dropped to her gloved hands, then lifted back to hers, holding her captive. The unspoken question hung heavy in the air. Am I beyond repair? And will I stain you? Confusion was a constant companion to Eleanor. He was ruthless, she knew. She had overheard hushed phone calls in his study, seen the cold, unyielding resolve in his face when discussing business deals that surely involved more than just art acquisitions. His staff, from the house manager to the discreet security personnel, moved with a deference that bordered on fear. Yet, with her, there was a different tenor. He observed, he analyzed, he cared in the most detached, clinical way. One morning, she found a new rare botanical volume on her studio desk, a detailed study of the Orchis mascula, the purple orchid. It was a plant with a specific, delicate light requirement for growth. She remembered mentioning her fascination with orchids in passing weeks ago, during a conversation about color pigments in ancient botanical illustrations. He hadn't just listened, he had acted. The gesture was unsettling, a potent blend of subtle thoughtfulness and unsettling surveillance. It made her wonder how many other casual observations he cataloged about her. The constant push and pull between fear and a reluctant, insidious attraction was exhausting. His power was a gravitational force she couldn't escape. When he was near, the air thickened, her senses heightened. She found herself noticing the precise angle of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he leaned over a document, the unexpected depth in his voice when he spoke about a particularly poignant piece of art. He was a dangerous man, a man of shadows and unspoken threats, yet he was also the man who had pulled her family from the brink, who saw the integrity in her work when others sought to exploit it. She fought it fiercely. Every internal monologue was a battle. He's a monster. A criminal. He owns you. This isn't real. This isn't love. It's control. But then he would catch her eye across a room, a silent acknowledgement, a shared secret in a world of pretenses, and a spark, unwilling and terrifying, would ignite within her. Her pulse would quicken, her breath would catch, and for a fleeting moment, the gilded cage would feel less like a prison and more like a sanctuary. One afternoon, a delivery arrived at the gallery, an exquisite ancient tapestry, larger than any she had previously handled. As she began to unpack it, Julian's former assistant, a sniveling man named Gregory, who had gladly done Julian's dirty work, appeared. "Eleanor, darling," he began, his tone unctuous, "I hear you're the new favorite. Lucky girl. Just remember, secrets have a way of coming out. Especially from old colleagues." He winked, a sneering, unpleasant gesture, hinting at the lingering shadow of Julian's schemes. Eleanor felt a surge of fear. Before she could reply, Enzo's voice, cold and lethal, sliced through the air. He had appeared from seemingly nowhere, his presence a sudden, sharp chill. "Mr. Davies," he said, using a name Eleanor had never heard for Gregory, his eyes fixed on the man, "I believe you have an appointment with my head of security. There are certain discrepancies regarding your recent access to gallery archives. A matter of intellectual property theft, I believe." Gregory's face went white. He stammered, then fled, his bravado crumbling instantly. Enzo turned to Eleanor, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. "Trouble tends to seek out the unprotected, Miss Vance. You are no longer unprotected." He paused, his eyes sweeping over her, a possessive fire in their depths. "And I have very little patience for those who linger in the shadows, attempting to cause you harm." The implication was chilling, not just Gregory, but anyone. Eleanor felt a fresh wave of unease, mixed with a startling surge of gratitude. He was dangerous, yes, terrifyingly so. But he was her danger, her protector. The line between being owned and being cared for, between fear and a burgeoning, forbidden attraction, blurred with every passing moment in his golden world. She was walking on a tightrope, high above the abyss, and Enzo Moretti was the only one holding the balance pole. The fragile equilibrium Eleanor had found within Enzo's gilded cage was shattered by a stark, chilling reminder of the outside world's persistent malice. It began subtly, a series of small, unsettling disturbances that preyed on her deepest fears. First, a cryptic, untraceable email arrived in her personal inbox, a blurry, zoomed-in photograph of her mother's hospital room, the curtains slightly ajar. The accompanying text was simple. "Some connections are harder to cut than others. We're still watching." The message was clear, menacing, a phantom limb of Julian Thorne's lingering malevolence. A cold dread gripped Eleanor. She immediately tried to call a hospital, her hand shaking so violently she almost dropped her phone. Her mother was fine, the nurses assured her, but the seed of terror had been planted. Julian hadn't just been dismissed, he had been silenced. But his former associate, the shadowy collector who'd commissioned the forged vase, or a man whose name she still didn't know, but whose influence she now understood to be vast and insidious, clearly hadn't forgotten. The second incident was more direct, striking at her professional core. She was working late in her studio, meticulously restoring a delicate porcelain figurine, when she noticed a faint, acrid smell. A quick inspection revealed a thin, almost invisible layer of corrosive liquid had been sprayed onto several of her unfinished pieces, subtle enough to be mistaken for a cleaning accident, but potent enough to cause irreversible damage if left untreated. Panic, sharp and visceral, seized her. This was targeted, malicious, and designed to ruin her work, to dismantle her new sense of purpose under Enzo. She spent the next few hours frantically neutralizing the damage, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury. Who could have done this? How had they gained access to Enzo's notoriously secure residence? The thought that his impenetrable fortress could be breached, even in such a minor, insidious way, was deeply unsettling. Eleanor didn't know who was behind these attacks, but the chilling certainty was that it stemmed from the fallout of the forged vase incident. Julian, broken and humiliated, was likely seeking petty revenge, perhaps emboldened by his powerful, nameless associate. The realization of her deep vulnerability, even under Enzo's protection, was a cold splash of reality. She was a target. She hesitated, wrestling with her internal conflict. Should she tell Enzo? Her fiercely independent spirit rebelled against running to him with every problem, yet her rational mind screamed that this was beyond her capacity to handle. He was her protector, after all, and these attacks were a direct challenge to his authority, to the sanctuary he had imposed upon her. The next morning, she found a single, perfect, obsidian black orchid, not the purple one from before, but a darker, more menacing variety, placed on her studio desk. Beneath it was a small, elegant card, blank except for a single chilling inscription in precise calligraphic script, a bloom from the abyss. Julian sends his regards. That was it. The final straw. The casual, almost mocking nature of the threat, the audacious infiltration of Enzo's supposedly impenetrable sanctum, ignited a cold, hard resolve within her. He had to know. She found Enzo in his study, engrossed in a complex financial report on his massive ebony desk. The room was bathed in the soft, diffused light of the morning, but his presence still commanded every shadow. She placed the obsidian orchid and the card on his desk, silently. Enzo's eyes, as sharp and unyielding as ever, lifted from the report. He glanced at the orchid, then at the card, his expression utterly unreadable. His fingers, long and strong, picked up the card, his thumb tracing the chilling message. The silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating. Julian Thorne, he finally said, his voice dangerously low, stripped of any warmth. He still clings to the notion of his own significance. His gaze, now focused on Eleanor, was intense, dissecting her fear, her anger, her suppressed terror. And he believes he can still touch what is mine. Eleanor swallowed, her heart pounding. He sent an email about my mother. And someone sprayed corrosive liquid on some of my pieces yesterday. It was subtle, but Enzo's jaw tightened, a muscle clenching almost imperceptibly. The air around him seemed to drop several degrees, becoming charged with an unseen, powerful energy. She felt the palpable shift in his demeanor, from calm control to something cold, lethal, and utterly ruthless. His eyes, usually discerning, were now pure, unadulterated danger. He stood, slowly, deliberately, his height suddenly overwhelming. He walked to the panoramic window, his back to her, and pulled out his phone. The conversation was brief, curt, spoken in a language she didn't fully understand, a flurry of rapid-fire commands, precise locations, and chilling directives that needed no translation. Locate his current associates, every lingering thread, make him regret ever breathing her name. I want it handled. Permanently. The word permanently hung in the air, a chilling echo. Eleanor felt a jolt of shock, then a wave of pure, unadulterated. This was Enzo Moretti, stripped bare of pretense. This was the true nature of his power, a force that moved with silent, brutal efficiency, a force she was now directly tied to. Fear, sharp and cold, still lingered, but was quickly overshadowed by a dark satisfaction, a perverse sense of relief. Julian and his accomplice had threatened her, had reached into her life with venomous intent. And Enzo, her dangerous protector, was now unleashed. He turned from the window, his expression cold and resolved. His obsidian eyes met hers, and for a fleeting moment, she saw not just the ruthless titan, but a hint of something deeper, a possessive fire that burned solely for her. "This will not happen again, Eleanor," he stated, his voice calm, but with an underlying steel that brooked no argument. "No one touches what is mine. No one. Understand." Eleanor nodded, her throat tight. She understood. She understood the implicit claim, the absolute protection, and the terrifying, limitless power that came with it. A shiver ran down her spine, not entirely from fear. She was his. And for the first time, amidst the terror, there was a strange, dark comfort in that truth. The world outside Enzo's walls was a dangerous place. Inside, she was undeniably safe. But the sheer ruthlessness of his response, the casual declaration of permanently, left her with a profound, almost dizzying realization of the monster she had unwittingly allied herself with. The aftermath of Enzo's swift, brutal response to Julian's lingering threat left Eleanor with a profound sense of security, laced with a new, unsettling fascination. The corrosive damage to her pieces had been expertly reversed by a team Enzo had silently dispatched, leaving no trace. Gregory, Julian's sniveling assistant, vanished without a ripple, his professional existence evaporating as if he had never been. The silence that followed was absolute, a testament to Enzo's chilling efficiency. Eleanor felt the weight of his protection, heavy and undeniable, and within that weight, an odd, almost perverse comfort. The days that followed were marked by a subtle shift in their dynamic. The air between them, once purely charged with dangerous intrigue, now carried a new undercurrent of understanding. Eleanor, while still wary, found herself observing Enzo with a more nuanced gaze. She began to see the cracks in his obsidian facade, glimpses of the complex, burdened man beneath the ruthless exterior. It was during one of their late-night sessions in his study, examining a series of ancient Roman coins, that she witnessed it. Eleanor was meticulously cataloging the minute details of each coin, her passion for history a quiet, absorbing force. Enzo sat opposite her, not focused on the coins, but on a leather-bound book, its pages yellowed with age. His usual posture, one of coiled power, seemed slightly relaxed, his shoulders less tense. He turned a page, and a faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped him. His gaze, usually sharp and penetrating, was softened by a distant melancholy as he stared at a faded photograph tucked within the book's leaves. It was an old image, sepia-toned, of a smiling woman with kind eyes, holding a small, dark-haired boy. Enzo, she realized, impossibly young and unburdened. The woman's face held a striking resemblance to a softer, warmer version of his own features. His mother, Eleanor intuited. A wave of unexpected empathy washed over Eleanor. She saw for the first time, not the unyielding titan, but a man touched by loss, burdened by memory. It was a fleeting glimpse, a vulnerability he never allowed to surface, but it resonated deeply within her own experience of grief. "She looks kind," Eleanor murmured, her voice soft, almost hesitant, breaking the sacred silence of his private moment. Enzo's head snapped up, his eyes immediately hardening, the mask of the ruthless collector slamming back into place. For a terrifying second, Eleanor feared she had overstepped, intruded on a pain he fiercely guarded. But then a subtle softening, a faint flicker of something akin to surprise, crossed his features. He looked at the photograph again, then back at her. She was, he acknowledged, his voice the low, rough murmur, uncharacteristically devoid of his usual controlled cadence. "She taught me to see beauty in the broken, to rebuild what others discard." He closed the book, the photograph still tucked inside, his gaze growing distant. "A foolish lesson, perhaps, for the world I found myself in." Eleanor felt a profound connection in that moment, a bridge built between their shared experiences of pain and the lessons learned from those they had lost. "No," she countered, her voice firm. "Not foolish. Essential. It teaches you what to fight for, what to protect." He looked at her then, truly looked at her, and in his obsidian eyes she saw a flicker of understanding, a recognition of her own unspoken scars. "You speak from experience, Miss Vance," he observed, his tone now less guarded, more questioning. Eleanor hesitated. Sharing personal secrets, especially with Enzo, felt like stripping herself bare, but the moment, fragile and profound, compelled her. "My father," she began, her voice tinged with the familiar ache of old wounds. "He was an artist, a sculptor. He poured his heart into his work, but he was too trusting. He built a small business, a dream, but others took advantage. It failed. He lost everything. And then he lost himself. Her voice cracked slightly. He always told me, Eleanor, never let anyone take your eyes off the beauty, even when the world is ugly. Enzo listened, his gaze unwavering, absorbing every word, every nuance of her pain. He didn't offer platitudes or false comfort. His silence was a testament, a deep, respectful acknowledgement of her vulnerability. When she finished, he simply nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. And your mother's illness, he prompted softly, and your brother's difficulties. They stem from this loss, this exploitation. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, drawn from the meticulous file he undoubtedly kept on her. Eleanor flinched at the bluntness, but appreciated his directness. Yes, I've spent years trying to piece back together what was broken, trying to protect them from the harshness of a world my father never truly understood. Her eyes, full of a quiet, enduring strength, met his. I understand what it means to be burdened by ghosts, Mr. Moretti, and to carry the weight of protecting those you love. A long silence settled between them, a silence now rich with a shared, unspoken understanding. Enzo rose again, walking to the large window, staring out at the glittering cityscape. My family, he finally said, his back to her, his voice low, almost a whisper, built an empire, brick by bloody brick. My grandfather was relentless. My father more so. They saw the world as a battlefield, and trust as a weakness to be exploited. He paused, a deep breath filling the expansive space. My mother tried to temper it, to show me another way. But the lessons of the battlefield often prove stronger than the whispers of an orchid. He turned, his obsidian eyes, usually so guarded, now held a rare, raw vulnerability. I learned early that sentiment is a liability. That loyalty must be commanded, not earned. That to protect anything, you must be willing to burn everything else. He took a step towards her, his gaze intense. But you, Miss Vance, you believe in something different. You seek to restore, to find the inherent worth. It is disorienting. Perhaps, Eleanor said, her voice steady. Disorienting is exactly what you need. She met his gaze without flinching, a new confidence blooming within her. She had seen his crack, shown him hers, and in that shared vulnerability, a profound, dangerous intimacy had taken root. She understood now. He carried a heavy legacy, a world of darkness he hadn't chosen but was forced to inhabit. And in her, he saw a reflection of the light he had almost forgotten. The tension in the room, once sharp with apprehension, now hummed with a different kind of energy, a magnetic pull, undeniable and intoxicating. Eleanor knew she was playing with fire, exposing her heart to a man capable of unimaginable ruthlessness. But in his shadowed eyes she saw not just danger, but also a desperate yearning for something he couldn't name, something she, perhaps, held the key to. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, a day that had started with an unusual sense of peace. Eleanor had been engrossed in stabilizing the delicate pigments of a 17th-century portrait, the quiet hum of her studio a soothing balm. Her phone, usually a silent sentinel, vibrated with an unfamiliar number. It was the hospital. Her mother's condition had worsened unexpectedly, a critical complication. They needed her signature on an urgent consent form. Her heart seized in her chest, a cold, sharp claw. Panic, raw and unyielding, clawed at her. Her mother. Always her mother. The lifeline, the only true anchor she had left. She knew Enzo had secured her mother's care, but medical emergencies were unpredictable. The voice on the phone, calm yet insistent, gave her an address, a discreet private clinic in an older part of the city, away from the main hospital for specialized procedures. It sounded plausible, if unusual. She raced out, a hurried note left for Enzo's security, her mind a frantic blur of medical jargon and desperate prayers. The familiar comfort of Enzo's penthouse, the silent efficiency of his staff, the very notion of his protection, vanished the moment she stepped into a taxi. She was just Eleanor Vance again, a woman on the edge, desperate to save her ailing mother. The clinic was a stark, unassuming building, tucked away on a cobbled street usually bustling with foot traffic but now strangely quiet. The air hung heavy with the smell of damp earth and exhaust fumes. The wrought iron gate creaked shut behind her with an ominous finality. Inside, the reception area was empty, eerily silent. A tremor of unease, cold and insistent, snaked its way up her spine. This felt wrong. Every instinct, honed by years of navigating precarious situations, screamed at her. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely a whisper in the cavernous space. The echo was her only reply. Then a door creaked open at the far end of the hall. Julian Thorne emerged, his face a pale, triumphant sneer. He was flanked by two burly men, their suits ill-fitting, their eyes cold and empty. Behind Julian, a figure Eleanor recognized from the auction, the nameless collector, Mr. Davies, elegant and menacing, stepped into view. "Eleanor, darling," Julian purred, his voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "So glad you could make it. We've been expecting you." A sickening jolt of realization hit her. It was a trap. A cruel, elaborate, heart-wrenching trap. Her mother. It had all been a lie. Terror, cold and absolute, enveloped her. "My mother. Is she perfectly safe for now?" Julian interrupted, his smile widening. "But her future, like yours, is a rather flexible commodity. Depends on how cooperative you choose to be." He gestured towards the nameless collector. "Mr. Davies here has a few lingering questions about your unexpected promotion and your sudden attachment to Mr. Moretti's assets." The two men advanced, their movements swift and practiced. Eleanor tried to back away, her legs heavy, unresponsive. A hand, thick and brutal, seized her arm, twisting it behind her back with surprising force. The pin camera, forgotten in her panic, clattered to the floor, a tiny, metallic protest. Hopelessness, profound and crushing, descended upon her. She was utterly, completely exposed. Mr. Davies stepped forward, his eyes, dark and intelligent, scanning her with a chilling assessment. "Miss Vance, you chose a very powerful patron. But even the most powerful men have vulnerabilities. And sometimes they choose to cut their losses." He smiled, a cold, reptilian curving of his lips. "Mr. Moretti, it seemed, has decided to do just that." "What are you talking about?" Eleanor spat, defiance flaring despite her terror. "He wouldn't abandon me." Julian laughed, harsh, grating sound. "Oh, but he has. He used you, Eleanor, to expose me, to clear out a few inconvenient truths about his art dealings. And now that you've served your purpose, well, you're a liability. Loose ends are always a problem for men like Moretti." He pulled out his own phone, tapping on it with glee. "Listen to this. A little recording from a very interesting conversation between Mr. Moretti and one of his trusted associates." A voice unmistakably Enzo's filled the sterile silence of the room. It was cold, detached, utterly devoid of emotion. She served her purpose. Eleanor's breath hitched. "The cleanup operation is ongoing. Any lingering complications are to be dealt with efficiently." There was a pause, a chilling silence, then the distinct sound of a sigh. "I do not mourn discarded tools." The words ripped through Eleanor's heart, a wound far deeper than any physical blow. Betrayal. It was a crushing, agonizing pain, sharper than any terror. He had used her. He had seen her vulnerabilities, her desperation, and had coolly manipulated her. The shared secrets, the glimpses into his shadowed past, the quiet moments of connection, all of it a lie. A calculated act. The idea that he had cared, that he had seen something genuine in her, was a cruel, devastating illusion. Her world tilted, plunged into an abyss of despair. The gilded cage hadn't been a sanctuary. It had been a cleverly disguised trap. Enzo hadn't protected her. He had merely possessed her, a valuable asset to be utilized and then discarded. The crushing loneliness of that realization was suffocating. She was truly alone, at the mercy of men who saw her as nothing more than a pawn, just as Julian always had. Mr. Davies stepped closer, his voice a low, silken threat. "So, Miss Vance, now that we understand where Mr. Moretti's loyalties truly lie, we have some questions for you. About his operations, his network, and a few sensitive details that only someone in your unique position would know." He gestured to the burly men. "You will be cooperative, or your mother's condition might take a turn for the worse. And your brother, well, he has a rather unfortunate habit of finding himself in the wrong places." Eleanor felt a metallic tang of fear in her mouth. Her heart, already shattered by Enzo's perceived betrayal, now pounded with the desperate rhythm of a hunted animal. Her life, her family's lives, were in the hands of these men, and the man she had trusted, the man she had allowed herself to feel a reluctant, dangerous connection to, had abandoned her to her fate. There was no hope. No rescue. Only the terrifying cold certainty of her impending destruction. The recording of Enzo's cold, dispassionate voice echoed in Eleanor's ears, each word a fresh wound, twisting the knife of betrayal deeper into her already shattered heart. I do not mourn discarded tools. The chilling finality of it. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting the bitter tears that threatened to fall, refusing to give Julian and Mr. Davies the satisfaction of seeing her break. But inside, she was already shattered, adrift in a sea of absolute despair. Julian Thorne, emboldened by the fabricated recording, leaned in, his breath hot and fetid. A shame, isn't it, Eleanor? All that loyalty for a man who sees you as nothing but a means to an end. Now, about those sensitive details. Mr. Davies, the nameless collector, gave a soft, almost appreciative chuckle, his eyes gleaming with intellectual malice. Tell us, Miss Vance, what exactly does Mr. Moretti truly value? Beyond the obvious ardent steel, where are his weaknesses? His vulnerabilities? Eleanor lifted her chin, her eyes blazing with a defiant, albeit hopeless, fire. I know nothing that would help you, she rasped, her throat tight with fear and fury. He has no weaknesses. The lie felt hollow even to her. She had believed she had seen his vulnerabilities, those fleeting cracks in the obsidian. Now she knew they were just illusions. The burly man holding her arm tightened his grip, pulling her hair painfully. She's being difficult, boss. Mr. Davies merely smiled, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Patience. Everyone breaks eventually. We have all night, and we have other leverage. He nodded subtly to Julian. Just then, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the building. Eleanor felt it more than heard it, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated up from the soles of her worn shoes. The two burly men exchanged a nervous glance. Julian, oblivious in his triumphant glee, continued to gloat. Perhaps a little demonstration, Eleanor? To remind you of your mother's delicate health or your brother's penchant for trouble. But Mr. Davies, more attuned to the subtle shifts in the air, stiffened. His smile faltered, replaced by a cold, calculating frown. He listened, his head cocked slightly, his gaze darting to the heavy, metal-reinforced door of the clinic. A low, guttural roar, muffled but undeniably powerful, tore through the otherwise silent building. It wasn't human. It was the sound of something primal, something unleashed. Suddenly, the air pressure in the room shifted. The heavy door at the end of the hall, which had been securely locked, didn't just open. It exploded inward with a deafening crash, tearing from its hinges with a shriek of tortured metal. Dust, plaster, and splinters of wood rained down, illuminated by the harsh, sterile overhead lights. And through the gaping maw of the ruined doorway, a figure emerged. Enzo Moretti. He was no longer the meticulously composed billionaire, the detached collector. He was a force of nature, a storm made flesh. His tailored suit was slightly rumpled, his dark hair a wilder, more menacing cascade across his forehead. His face was a mask of cold, incandescent fury, his obsidian eyes burning with a terrifying, singular intensity that promised absolute devastation. The scent of ozone and something sharply metallic, like blood and gunpowder, preceded him. He didn't stride in heroically. He stalked, each step a deliberate, inexorable advance, a predator entering its domain. Behind him, moving with seamless, terrifying efficiency, were three other men, their faces grim, their movements precise, like extensions of Enzo's own lethal will. They carried no visible weapons, but their coiled readiness, the silent menace radiating from them, was more potent than any blade. Julian Thorne's jaw dropped, his face turning an ashen white that matched his suit. Moretti, he stammered, his bravado crumbling instantly. How? Enzo didn't answer him. His gaze, a terrifying, unbroken laser, was fixed solely on Eleanor. He saw her disheveled hair, the fear etched onto her pale face, the bruising beginning to bloom on her arm where she'd been held. He saw the crumpled pen camera on the floor, the remnants of the broken door, and the smug, predatory faces of the men who had dared to touch what was his. A low, visceral growl rumbled in Enzo's chest, a sound that made the hair on Eleanor's arm stand on end. It was the sound of a beast protecting its mate. The burly man holding Eleanor's arm instinctively tightened his grip, trying to shield himself with her. It was a fatal mistake. Enzo moved. He didn't run. He blurred. One moment he was across the room. The next he was a terrifying, irresistible force, crashing into the men. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, a brutal ballet of lethal precision. His movements were economic, powerful, and utterly merciless. A swift, brutal strike to the burly man's jaw sent him sprawling, his head hitting the tiled floor with a sickening thud. The other man, too slow to react, found Enzo's hand clamp around his throat, lifting him clear off his feet before slamming him against the wall, the dull crack of impact echoing in the room. He crumpled, unconscious. Eleanor, released from her captor's grip, stumbled forward, disoriented, her mind reeling from the sudden, overwhelming violence. Relief, so potent it felt like pure adrenaline, surged through her, quickly followed by a terrifying. This was the true face of Enzo Moretti's empire, a force as brutal as it was absolute. Julian, paralyzed by terror, tried to flee, scrambling towards a side door. But one of Enzo's silent men was already there, blocking his path, a phantom in the ruined doorway. Julian turned back, his eyes wide with desperate terror, only to find Enzo standing before him, a terrifying, unyielding presence. Julian, Enzo's voice was a low, chilling whisper, devoid of any warmth. You touched what was mine. You dared to lay hands on her. You used her vulnerabilities, her family, to lure her into your petty games. He held up his phone, its screen glowing with the recording Julian had played for Eleanor. She served her purpose. Any lingering complications are to be dealt with efficiently. I do not mourn discarded tools. Enzo's voice, raw and filled with cold fury, mirrored the recording. A rather clever fabrication, Thorne. But you underestimated my reach, my loyalty, and my possessiveness. He snatched the phone from Julian's trembling hand, crushing it in his grip with a sound of tortured plastic and glass. Then, with a lightning-fast movement, Enzo's fist connected with Julian's jaw, a devastating blow that sent the man flying across the room to collapse in an inert heap. Mr. Davies, the nameless collector, stood frozen, his face stripped of its composure, revealing raw, unadulterated fear. He was no fool. He recognized absolute power when it stood before him, drenched in fury. His carefully constructed network, his subtle threats, meant nothing against this. Enzo turned his burning gaze towards him, his eyes like twin points of obsidian fire. And you, Mr. Davies, you thought you could exploit my assets, my resources. He took a slow, deliberate step towards the collector, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. You sought to find my weaknesses, to dismantle what I have built. You were wrong. He paused, a terrifying silence descending. Eleanor Vance is not a weakness. She is my strength, my principle, my possession. And no one touches what is mine. He didn't lay a hand on Mr. Davies. He didn't need to. He simply held the man's gaze, a silent promise of unimaginable retribution contained within his burning eyes. The two other silent men, Enzo's enforcers, stepped forward, flanking Mr. Davies, their presence a chilling certainty of what was to come. Then, Enzo turned to Eleanor. She stood trembling, a mixture of terror, relief, and a bewildering, dangerous attraction swirling within her. He was a monster, yes, a force of brutal, magnificent power. But he was her monster, and he had come for her. His eyes, still blazing with residual fury, softened imperceptibly as they met hers. He walked towards her slowly this time until he was directly in front of her. His hand, strong and warm, reached out, not to seize, but to cup her cheek, his thumb gently stroking her skin. It was a gesture of immense tenderness, possessive and absolute, a stark contrast to the violence he had just unleashed. Eleanor, he murmured, his voice now a low, husky rumble, imbued with raw emotion. Did you truly believe I would abandon you? The question was a demand for understanding, for reassurance against the betrayal she had been forced to endure. Her eyes welled up, not with tears of sorrow, but of overwhelming relief and a profound, confusing surge of emotion. The recording, she whispered, her voice choked. It sounded like you. A flicker of pain, quickly masked by controlled anger, crossed his face. A crude forgery. My voice, yes, but carefully edited, twisted to feed your fears. Designed to break you. To break us. His grip on her face tightened imperceptibly, a silent vow. They mistook my control for indifference, my silence for abandonment. They will pay dearly for that miscalculation. He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against his hard, powerful body. It was a possessive embrace, a declaration of ownership that resonated deep within her bones. She buried her face in his shoulder, inhaling the scent of him, ozone, leather, and a fierce, protective masculinity. He was her anchor, her shield, her dangerous, terrifying sanctuary. "You are mine, Eleanor," he whispered against her hair, his voice rough with absolute conviction. "And no one touches what is mine." The words were not a request, but a sacred, unyielding vow. The clinic was a blur of sterile white and a metallic tang of fear. Enzo had whisked Eleanor away the moment Julian and Mr. Davies were neutralized, his grip on her arm firm, unwavering. She remembered being enveloped in the cool silence of his car, the muted hum of the engine a stark contrast to the chaos she had just escaped. Her body ached, a deep, persistent throb from the abuse, but it was the emotional trauma that truly left her hollow, a raw, gaping wound where trust had once been. The betrayal, however false, had been devastating. She woke in her suite at Enzo's penthouse, the silk sheets a cool caress against her feverish skin. The scent of lilies was faint, almost overshadowed by the antiseptic smell of the bandages on her arm, where the burly man had left deep, angry red marks. Beside her bed, a quiet presence. Enzo sat in a plush armchair, his gaze fixed on her. He didn't look away when she stirred, his obsidian eyes dark with an emotion she couldn't quite decipher, concern, perhaps, or a possessive fury barely contained. "Eleanor," he murmured, his voice a low, rough rumble. "How do you feel?" Her throat was dry, her voice hoarse. "Used. Betrayed." The words were out before she could stop them, raw and honest. She watched his face, half expecting anger, or perhaps the cold attachment she had heard in the doctored recording. Instead, a flicker of pain crossed his features, quickly masked. The recording was a fabrication designed to break you. "To break us," he reiterated, his voice heavy with a new, quiet intensity. He rose and poured a glass of water from a carafe on the bedside table, offering it to her. His hands, which had just hours ago delivered brutal justice, were surprisingly gentle as they held the glass. She took it, her fingers brushing his, and felt a strange current pass between them. The water was cool, soothing her parched throat. "Ah, I know," she whispered, "but for a moment, I believed it. That you had just discarded me." The confession was humiliating, yet necessary. He sat on the edge of her bed, the mattress barely dipping under his weight, his presence utterly dominant yet surprisingly comforting. "Never," he said, the word a steel-clad vow. His gaze was intense, unwavering, demanding her belief. "You are not a tool, Eleanor. You are different. You are mine, and what is mine I protect." Fiercely, he reached out, his thumb gently caressing the bruise on her arm. The touch sent shivers through her, a blend of fear and a dangerous, undeniable current of attraction. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and the unsettling, yet profoundly comforting reality of Enzo's care. He brought in the city's best doctors, discreetly, who treated her injuries with quiet efficiency. He ensured she ate, that she rested, his eyes always on her, a silent sentinel. He didn't smother her with words, but his presence was constant, a heavy, reassuring anchor in her turbulent world. She found herself watching him, trying to reconcile the ruthless man who had torn through the clinic with a quiet, attentive figure by her bedside. Meanwhile, the gears of Enzo's empire turned, unseen but relentlessly. She heard snippets from his conversations, muffled and indistinct, but enough to piece together the chilling reality of his justice. Julian Thorne, she learned from a hushed conversation between Enzo and his consigliere Nico, was not merely fired. His assets had been systematically frozen, his fraudulent dealings exposed to authorities in a way that ensured maximum legal and social disgrace. His career, his reputation, his very financial existence, all utterly annihilated. He was ruined, a pariah, stripped of everything he valued. The cruelty was surgical, absolute. Mr. Davies, the nameless collector, proved a harder target, his network far more insidious. But Enzo's methods were equally merciless. She pieced together rumors from hushed phone calls, the distant chatter of the news channels he sometimes watched. A series of unfortunate accidents befell Davies's legitimate businesses. Audits suddenly appeared, permits were revoked, key personnel mysteriously resigned. His reputation as a collector, once pristine, became tainted with whispers of forgery and illicit dealings, meticulously leaked to the right influential ears. His valuable art collection, the very foundation of his power, was systematically acquired by anonymous buyers, all, she suspected, ultimately linked back to Enzo, leaving him financially crippled and socially ostracized. Eleanor felt a dark, chilling satisfaction ripple through her. These men had sought to destroy her, to use her family as leverage, to tear down what she held dear. Enzo had retaliated with a ferocity that was breathtaking, dismantling their lives with the same precision she used to restore a masterpiece. It was a brutal form of justice, certainly, devoid of legal niceties, but undeniably effective. It was the justice of his world, and she was now irrevocably a part of it. One evening, as she sat on her balcony, wrapped in a cashmere throw, watching the city lights, Enzo joined her. The air was cool, carrying the distant murmur of city life. He handed her a steaming mug of her favorite herbal tea, a small gesture that spoke volumes. "They won't bother you again," he stated, his voice calm, resolute. "Their empires have fallen. Their names are whispers of regret." Eleanor took a sip of tea, the warmth spreading through her. She looked at him, his profile stark against the city glow. "You destroyed them." It wasn't a question. He met her gaze, his obsidian eyes unblinking. "They sought to destroy what was mine. I merely corrected their miscalculation." There was no remorse, no hesitation in his voice. Only cold, absolute conviction. A shiver ran through Eleanor, a complex mix of fear and an undeniable, powerful gratitude. He was dangerous, terrifying, but his ferocity was entirely directed at protecting her. She had been utterly vulnerable, a lamb among wolves, and he had been the apex predator who claimed her. And in that claiming, in that brutal display of power, she had found an unshakable security, a sense of belonging she had never known. "Thank you," she said, the words coming from a deep, honest place within her. He reached out, his hand gently covering hers where it rested on the mug. His touch was warm, solid, possessive. "You are mine, Eleanor," he repeated, his voice a low, husky promise. "My orchid. And I will burn the world to keep you safe." The intensity of his gaze, the unyielding strength of his claim, cemented their bond in a way that transcended simple affection. It was a fierce, primal connection, forged in fire and shadow. She had accepted his protection, but now a deeper acceptance was settling in, the understanding that she was truly his, irrevocably intertwined with his dangerous, powerful world. And the next chapter of their lives, steeped in the opulent shadows of his empire, was about to begin. Years had passed since Eleanor Vance stepped into the gilded cage, since Enzo Moretti declared her his. The penthouse, once a symbol of her beautiful captivity, had transformed into their home, a sanctuary of shared purpose and dangerous, unwavering love. The scent of lilies still permeated the air, but now it mingled with the earthy aroma of her own delicate orchids, thriving in a sun-drenched conservatory Enzo had built specifically for her, a testament to his constant, quiet devotion. Eleanor no longer moved with the quiet grace of someone trying not to be noticed. She moved with confidence, with the serene authority of a woman who had found her voice and her true power. She was now the undisputed head curator and chief restorer of the Obsidian Gallery, a role Enzo had not only bestowed upon her, but had empowered her to shape into her own vision. The gallery, under her meticulous guidance and Enzo's boundless resources, had become a global beacon of artistic integrity, renowned for its ethical acquisitions and unparalleled restoration work. Her talent, once buried by Julian's mediocrity, now shone brightly, respected and celebrated worldwide. Her studio, once a place of solitary toil, now hummed with the quiet industry of a small, dedicated team she had personally trained. She taught them to see beyond the surface, to understand the history and soul within each piece, a philosophy she had learned to apply to life itself. Enzo observed her from afar, often leaning against the doorway, a faint, possessive smile playing on his lips as he watched her work, his eyes filled with a pride that was both fierce and tender. Their shared life was a delicate dance between light and shadow. Enzo remained a collector, the formidable titan of industry whose empire stretched far beyond art. He still moved in a world of complex dealings, of ruthless decisions, a power wielded without apology. She still heard the low, urgent whispers in his study, the brief, cryptic phone calls with Nico, his ever-present shadow. But now, when he returned from his darker endeavors, he returned to her. He shed the mask of the unyielding boss, allowing her to see the man beneath, the man burdened by his legacy, yet softened by her presence. One crisp autumn evening, as the city lights blurred into a tapestry of gold below, they stood on their private balcony, a familiar ritual. Enzo's arm was wrapped securely around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid form, his chin resting on her hair. The silk of her dress rustled against his tailored suit, a soft counterpoint to the quiet hum of the city. The Caravaggio, Eleanor mused, looking out at the darkened skyline, I finally finished its full restoration. The depth, the shadows, they are breathtaking. Enzo's lips brush her temple. You brought its soul back to life, my orchid. Just as you did mine. His voice was a low, intimate rumble that vibrated through her. The words were a rare, precious confession, a testament to the profound transformation she had unwittingly wrought in him. She turned in his arms, her hands coming to rest on his chest, feeling the steady, powerful beat of his heart. His obsidian eyes, usually so guarded, held a deep, unyielding tenderness when they looked at her. You let me, she corrected softly. You allowed yourself to be seen. He chuckled, a rich, genuine sound. A dangerous indulgence, but one I no longer wish to live without. His gaze intensified, possessive and absolute. You are my principal, Eleanor. My center. My world. He held her tighter, as if to physically embed his claim. And you, Eleanor Vance Moretti, will remain mine. Always. The inclusion of his name, a subtle but powerful declaration of their future, sent a shiver of profound fulfillment through her. Their marriage, a quiet affair witnessed only by Nico and a handful of trusted witnesses, had solidified their bond months ago. It wasn't a conventional love story, certainly not one filled with grand romantic gestures in the traditional sense. It was a love built on fierce protection, unwavering loyalty, and a deep, often unspoken, understanding of each other's shadows and light. Her mother, now thriving and healthy, often visited, her eyes filled with a peaceful happiness Eleanor had thought impossible. Evan, guided by Enzo's discreet hand and Eleanor's steadfast encouragement, had not only excelled in his apprenticeship but had started his own small, honest business, finally finding his footing. Their lives, once so precarious, were now safe, anchored in the formidable strength of Enzo's protection. One particular afternoon, Enzo found Eleanor in the conservatory, carefully misting a rare species of orchid. The air was warm, humid, heavy with the scent of blossoming flowers. He watched her for a moment, the picture of serene concentration. I need to finalize the quarterly report for the gallery, she said without turning, sensing his presence. And then I was thinking about starting the acquisitions proposal for the new Renaissance wing. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. Always working, my orchid, he murmured, burying his face in her hair. Always seeking beauty. She leaned into his embrace, feeling the familiar comfort of his strength. It's what you gave me, Enzo. The freedom to create, to restore. He kissed the soft skin behind her ear, a possessive, tender gesture. I gave you nothing you didn't already possess. I merely cleared the path. He turned her gently in his arms, his obsidian eyes, filled with a love that was both dark and profound, locking with hers. You are my light, Eleanor. The truth I almost forgot. And my world, it thrives only with you in it. Eleanor smiled, a soft, genuine smile that reached her eyes. She knew their life would always have its undercurrents, its challenges. Enzo would forever be the man of shadows, protecting his empire with a ruthless hand. But now he had a home. He had a heart. And in his world, she was not just safe. She was cherished, revered, his own exquisite, thriving orchid. And you, Enzo Moretti, she whispered, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him, are my forever. Their kiss was deep possessive, a silent promise exchanged between two souls forged in fire and shadow, destined to reign together in a world of opulence and danger, his orchid, his world. Doesn't it feel like sometimes the most exquisite beauty emerges from the deepest shadows? Eleanor's journey reminds us that even when the world tries to define you by your scars, your true worth can never be erased. Your past isn't a punishment. It's the crucible that forged your unyielding spirit. Enzo's fierce, possessive love doesn't just protect you from the storm. It rebuilds your entire world. Perhaps you, too, have felt undervalued or feared your broken pieces could never be loved. This story whispers your worth is inherent. It waits for the right love to affirm it. If Eleanor's journey resonated with your heart, join our community. Like this video, subscribe for more untamed love and fierce protection. In the comments, share, what truth did this story awaken in you? Here you belong.